Friday, August 21st, 2026. 7 earthquakes rattle the Coso volcanic field in California within a matter of hours, the strongest hitting magnitude 3.4. On its own, that's a Tuesday in one of the most seismically restless corners of the state. But this isn't happening on its own. This is the third earthquake swarm to strike this exact stretch of the eastern California shear zone in 2 months. Not the third swarm ever, the third swarm since June. Same general region, same underlying fault system, same immediate neighbor, the Garlock Fault, a 160-mile fracture in the Earth capable, according to scientists, of producing an earthquake as large as magnitude 8.0, and one that has sat essentially silent for the entire century. Scientists have had instruments capable of measuring it. 3 swarms in 2 months clustered around a fault this significant is not the kind of pattern seismologists wave off as routine background noise. Here's exactly what's been happening beneath this stretch of the Mojave Desert since June, why the Garlock Fault specifically has scientists paying closer attention than usual, and what the honest, current science says about whether this pattern actually means anything. No dramatizing, no guessing, just what USGS and the seismologists tracking this sequence in real time are actually saying. If earthquake science like this matters to you, subscribe now so you don't miss the next confirmed update, and hit like so this reaches more people living directly along this fault system. Let's break down exactly what's been happening beneath the Mojave. To understand why 3 swarms in 2 months genuinely matters, you first need to understand the specific geological neighborhood this is all happening in, because it's one of the most structurally complicated and most closely watched stretches of California's entire fault network. This activity is centered in the eastern California shear zone, a broad region of interconnected faults running through the Mojave Desert that, according to seismologists, accommodates roughly 15 to 25% of the total motion happening between the Pacific and North American tectonic plates, a genuinely significant share of the overall plate boundaries movement, distributed across dozens of smaller, less individually famous faults rather than concentrated on the San Andreas alone. Sitting directly at the edge of that shear zone is the Garlock Fault, a roughly 160-mile-long left lateral fault marking the northern edge of the Mojave Desert and the southern boundary of the Basin and Range Province. According to the Southern California Earthquake Data Center, the Garlock Fault is capable of producing earthquakes in the magnitude 6.8 to 7.6 range, and separate analysis from Caltech researchers has specifically described the fault as capable of an earthquake, up to magnitude 8.0. And here's the detail that makes this fault so unusual and so closely watched. In the entire modern instrumental record, roughly a century of continuous monitoring, the Garlock Fault has never been observed to produce either a strong earthquake or, until relatively recently, even to creep. That changed following the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake sequence, and understanding that history is essential context for everything happening in this exact region right now. On July 4th and July 5th, 2019, a magnitude 6.44 shock followed by a magnitude 7.1 main shock struck near Ridgecrest, California, generating more than 100,000 aftershocks and becoming the largest earthquake sequence in Southern California in 2 decades. According to research from Caltech geophysicist Zachary Ross, published in the journal Science Satellite Radar Imagery, taken in the aftermath of that sequence, showed something that had never been recorded before. The Garlock Fault had begun to move, a slow, continuous process called aseismic creep, causing a measurable bulging of the land visible directly from space. This is surprising because we've never seen the Garlock Fault do anything, Ross said at the time. Here, all of a sudden, it changed its behavior. We don't know what it means. According to a separate analysis led by University of Iowa geodesist Bill Barnhart, working with USGS researchers, that same Ridgecrest sequence caused measurable stress increases along a 12 to 16-mile section of the Garlock Fault, concluding the stressed section could be capable of producing an earthquake in the magnitude 6.7 to 7.0 range if it eventually ruptured. As Barnhart put it directly at the time, the Garlock Fault has been quiet for a long time, but there's geologic evidence that there have been large earthquakes on it. It's a major fault line. That 2019 destabilization didn't resolve itself quickly, and it hasn't gone away in the years since. According to detailed tracking of seismic activity in this exact region, the area saw only 2 comparable earthquake swarms total between 2000 and 2018, one in 2009 and one in 2016. Since the 2019 Ridgecrest sequence, that pace has changed dramatically. 6 separate swarms have occurred in the same general area since 2019, including 2 in 2019 itself, 2 more in 2025, and now, as of this August, the second swarm already recorded in 2026 alone, with the third following closely behind it. That trend, according to seismologists tracking the pattern, strongly supports the interpretation that the regional crust in this area is still actively responding to the massive stress changes triggered by the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquakes, a genuine multi-year process of geological readjustment that 6 years later still hasn't fully settled down. Now here's the specific sequence that's unfolded just this summer, because it's worth walking through each of the 3 swarms individually to understand exactly what's been building. The most recent event, the one that prompted the headline this story is built around, struck the Coso volcanic field on August 21st, 2026. According to USGS, 7 tremors were detected near Coso Junction that Friday, with the strongest registering magnitude 3.4 at 10:26 in the morning Pacific time. The Coso volcanic field itself is a genuinely unusual feature worth understanding on its own terms. It's not a single mountain, but a 150 square mile cluster of volcanic vents, domes, active geothermal fields, fumaroles, and hot springs, all powered by a real underlying zone of magma. Its most recent actual eruption occurred tens of thousands of years ago, and according to USGS's own assessment, the region remains geologically active, though a fresh eruption is considered unlikely in the near term. Before that August swarm, a separate event struck on July 13th, 2026, in the immediate vicinity of the original 2019 Ridgecrest rupture zone, an area seismologists specifically track, using the designation S2260713.1. That swarm was directly linked by researchers to the same broad interaction between the Eastern California shear zone and the Garlock Fault. Activity interpreted as taking place on small, previously unmapped faults that have been progressively loaded with stress by both the larger regional fault system and the lingering effects of the 2019 sequence specifically. And just one day before that swarm began, on July 12, 2026, a magnitude 4.1 earthquake struck even closer to the structural heart of this entire puzzle, right near the actual intersection of the San Andreas and Garlock faults. According to detailed geological analysis of that specific event, the earthquake's depth of roughly 13.1 kilometers and its particular fault rupture mechanism didn't match simple slip along either the San Andreas or the Garlock individually. Instead, researchers interpreted it as occurring on a previously unknown connecting fault, a structure that mechanically links the 2 larger, more famous faults together at their junction, accommodating the localized compression that builds up specifically where the right lateral San Andreas and the left lateral Garlock meet and interact with each other. 3 swarms, 3 distinct locations, all clustered around the same broad geological neighborhood, all within roughly 6 weeks of each other. That's the pattern behind the story's headline, and it deserves a genuinely careful, honest assessment rather than either dismissal or panic. Here's where the actual science gets specific and important, because USGS has directly investigated at least one of these swarms with exactly the same rigor applied to more famous seismic events, and it's worth understanding precisely what they found. Regarding the earlier related activity at the southern margin of the Coso volcanic field, USGS issued a direct public statement addressing the exact question anyone watching a volcanic field suddenly shake would want answered. Earthquake swarms south of Coso volcanic field related tectonic, not volcanic activity, the agency stated plainly. According to that same USGS assessment, that particular swarm was directly triggered by a magnitude 5.4 earthquake located roughly 20 kilometers southeast of Little Lake, which was itself very likely an aftershock of a nearby magnitude 7.1 mainshock. Following that triggering event, USGS recorded an average of about 30 earthquakes per hour in the area for a sustained period, the overwhelming majority falling within the magnitude 1 to 3 range. Critically, the agency's own statement was direct and unambiguous. No ground deformation indicative of volcanic activity has been detected, and there is no imminent threat of an eruption. The California Volcano Observatory continues actively monitoring the situation, specifically for any sign that this could shift from tectonic to volcanic in nature, and will issue updates if that assessment ever changes. That direct ruling out of volcanic involvement matters enormously for correctly understanding this entire story, because it draws a clean, evidence-based line between 2 very different categories of concern. The seismic activity itself is real. It's genuinely elevated compared to this region's longer historical baseline, and it's directly connected to lingering stress from 2019's Ridgecrest sequence rather than to any current volcanic process. What it is not, based on USGS's own direct ground deformation monitoring, is a sign that the Coso volcanic field's underlying magma system is becoming active or approaching an eruption. So where does that leave the honest assessment of the Garlock Fault itself, the single largest, most consequential structure sitting at the center of this entire pattern? This is where genuine scientific caution, rather than either reassurance or alarm, is the only responsible position available. Following the original 2019 destabilization, USGS's own operational forecasting model, a system called UCERF3 ETAS, specifically designed to calculate real-time earthquake probability shifts following major seismic events, calculated that the chance of the Ridgecrest sequence triggering a magnitude 7 or greater earthquake, specifically on the Garlock Fault, sat at roughly 3.2% within the first 30 days following the main shock. That kind of probability generally decreases over time as stress gradually dissipates, but the same modeling showed it can also increase again following subsequent smaller aftershocks and swarms. Exactly the kind of repeated triggering event this region has now experienced multiple times since 2019, most recently again this summer, even a full year after the original 2019 sequence. According to that same USGS-connected research, the calculated probability of a magnitude 7 or greater Garlock event remained more than 3 times higher than the fault's long-term historical baseline probability would otherwise suggest. It's genuinely important to be precise about what that elevated probability actually means and doesn't mean in practical terms. A threefold increase over a very small baseline probability is still, in absolute terms, a small number. This is not a forecast predicting an imminent specific Garlock rupture. What it does represent is a scientifically grounded, quantified acknowledgement that this fault's risk calculus has genuinely shifted since 2019, and that each additional swarm occurring in the same broad region, including the 3 that have now struck within just the past 2 months, adds another data point seismologists have to factor into that continuously updating assessment, rather than treating each individual swarm as an isolated, unconnected event with no bearing on the fault's overall state. It's also worth being direct about a persistent misconception that USGS-connected researchers have specifically pushed back against, because it's exactly the kind of assumption that can lead people to misjudge situations like this one in the reassuring direction, rather than the alarming one. There's a common belief that a significant earthquake sequence like Ridgecrest somehow releases built-up regional stress and makes future large earthquakes in the surrounding area less likely. According to the researchers who studied the Garlock Fault's post-Ridgecrest behavior directly, that's not accurate. Earthquakes make future earthquakes more likely, not less, in the surrounding region, even though most of the time those follow-up events are indeed smaller. Occasionally they're bigger. That's precisely the honest, uncomfortable nuance sitting underneath a headline like 3 swarms in 2 months is not normal. This pattern isn't confirmation that a major Garlock earthquake is now imminent, but it's also not evidence that the risk has been quietly resolving itself in the years since 2019. It's ongoing, ambiguous, ongoing evidence of a fault system still actively working through a genuine multi-year state of destabilization that scientists themselves have openly admitted they don't fully understand the ultimate trajectory of. So, pulling this together, here's the honest, complete picture of what's actually happening beneath this stretch of the Mojave Desert. Since the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake sequence, the Garlock Fault, a structure capable of producing an earthquake up to magnitude 8.0, and one that had never been observed to move at all in over a century of monitoring, began creeping for the first time on record, and the broader region surrounding it has experienced a measurable, sustained increase in earthquake swarm activity, 6 separate swarms since 2019 compared to just 2 in the 19 years before it. This summer specifically has seen 3 of those swarms cluster within roughly 6 weeks of each other near the San Andreas-Garlock junction in July, near the original Ridgecrest rupture zone later that same month, and at the Coso volcanic field in August. USGS has directly, specifically ruled out volcanic activity as the cause of the Coso area swarms, confirming through ground deformation monitoring that this remains tectonic, stress-driven activity rather than any sign of the Coso magma system stirring. And the Garlock Fault's own calculated earthquake probability, according to USGS-connected modeling, has remained meaningfully elevated above its historical baseline in the years since 2019, a probability that individual swarms like these 3 can incrementally shift, without any current model claiming to know exactly when or whether that elevated risk will eventually resolve into an actual major rupture. If you live anywhere in the broader region surrounding the eastern California shear zone, the Garlock Fault, or the wider Mojave Desert, including communities from Bakersfield through Ridgecrest and across the Antelope Valley, the practical guidance here mirrors what applies to any significant actively monitored seismic zone. Know your home's specific earthquake preparedness, secured furniture, a basic emergency kit with water, food, and first aid supplies sufficient for at least 72 hours, and a family communication plan for a scenario where mobile networks are disrupted. Understand that USGS and the Southern California Earthquake Center continue monitoring this exact fault system in real time precisely because of this ongoing pattern, and that any genuine escalation, a significant jump in either magnitude or frequency beyond what's already been recorded this summer, is exactly the kind of development these agencies are positioned to detect and communicate quickly. That's the complete, honest picture of why 3 earthquake swarms in 2 months near the Garlock Fault genuinely isn't simply routine background noise, without crossing into a false claim that a major earthquake is now confirmed to be imminent. We'll keep tracking this sequence as new activity is recorded across this region. If you live anywhere near the Eastern California shear zone or the Garlock Fault, drop a comment and let me know if you felt any of this activity yourself. And subscribe so you're the first to know the moment this pattern genuinely changes. See you in the next one.